collection of people's ways into research, which they found, but then they also found their research in support of each other. And the weaving is actually an ideal. Many people who watch this were jealous, because it is not often that you find a place in the university where you can work with others and they help you to find voice. So, how to proceed? Any reactions to that video before we talk a bit more about the course generally? Any reaction at all? Yes.
I think it's important to see Prof moving with her students.
Yes.
Master's to PhD. It's very important.
And then the students moving to lecturers with their students. And it's, so I think Buthelezi there was undergrad, Tamia was a lecturer, and MA already, very good, sorry. But the movement is wonderful, and it's cross-generational, and it's going. So this is the university. We were talking about how to create the library or whatever. It's relational.
Thank you, Pamela. And that is what worries me about a heavy focus on digitization, is that the relational aspect of learning and of imagining gets lost, because you're there by yourself with a screen. You're not, doing what we do. And I'm not against digitization, but I think we need both. So if the one isn't there, we have the other. How to proceed? Or do you want us to start?
No, if I can start. So I suppose as a preface, because I could just kind of put some reflections together on kind of the WDA in the last year, because of course it started with Pamela convening Asfour, as she's wont to do beautifully so at a retreat, and saying we're going to plan this thing collectively. And admittedly, I had no idea what this thing is and how we actually plan it collectively.
And no one had any idea. That was
Yes.
a miracle.
And you allowed the space for us to also actually do it collectively. Because I thought okay, yeah, sure, say be structured. You'll tell me to fill in the blanks, I'll do that, that's collective. But it really wasn't. And so Pamela had given us notebooks at the retreat, which I then kept over the year every time we met. And kind of brought it in today for the final note-taking of
Could you show people?
Yeah.
Because people took notes differently too, which was really fascinating.
So at the retreat, I ended up colouring in my notes as we went through, just because there was stationery provided.
And Dimitri's notebook was extremely academic. But it's fascinating. It's like looking inside people's minds, these notebooks.
And at the end of it, we got to turn our notebooks in, and Pamela wrote us a letter, kind of like a handwritten letter to each of us, on some of her thoughts. We got to flag which pieces we wanted her to look through, and it was really beautiful that actually came back also timelessly. It wasn't 6 months later or something. So there was this in speaking about relationality. It was just someone also taking that care to pay attention to where you were at. At the same time as all of this was kind of happening, I had graduated from my doctorate and got the subsequent post in political studies, and was having a huge existential crisis by the time that the WDA began in the first block, around what it means existentially for me to now fall under the category of staff. As someone who came through kind of the FMF moment and what that meant for scholarship and all of that. And I think it was really important and a huge kind of privilege, and thank you to all of you, to be able to work on a team with all of you, because I think in that moment it would have been really easy to get extremely, even with the presence of everyone, I got extremely disillusioned about the institution, what the project is, where it goes, whether it can go anywhere. But what then proceeded, almost despite my own disillusionment, was just seeing what the WDA and seeing what the writing program was doing for students and convening us in a way, and the team was like phenomenal in creating spaces where, despite whatever is, we're coming together to do something that we enjoy and helping each other get through it together. And so developing writing practice with the doctoral fellows, but also amongst ourselves to say, okay, how do we do this in a cross-faculty way? Which is really challenging as well. Like different students were like, oh, okay, that, you're talking about like your feelings a lot here, or you're talking a lot like too clinically here, or you have to change your own registers for writing practice constantly. And so, I mean, even what follows here is then at the end of every day was a check-in. What's going well, what isn't, how can we change things, not just for next year, for tomorrow. This wasn't even for like next block. This was like, what do we do differently tomorrow? And I think that was incredible as well, that everyone was just so sensitive to being so invested that the program was shaped from the students, and the particular students in the room at the time.
Well, here, some are here too.
And so, yeah, then it continues with like kind of all the programs, and because I do like a scrapbook. And then one of them was from the session that ran around like presentations. And so we had this ridiculous thing that opens up. I mean, we used the flip chart, thank you, to talk about it. And I found a way to, of course, scrunch it into the book, because I think there was something to be said about it opening beyond the pages. And just everything that kind of followed on was that. And towards the end, I think in the last week of the program, which was in August, I'd written a letter. I just fangirled actually about like the team, and I was like, you guys are amazing, thank you. But it was like excerpts taken from the journal as well, and from what people had shared. And so, yeah, so I'm just going to leave that there as well, just to say, I think there were a lot of things that the writing program did which can be seen in texts, in like the materials it produced, that can be seen in the proposals that were submitted, and all of the stats that will no doubt come out. But I think there was something else that it did. And I think there was some type of meaningful engagement with, writing practice and research and all of that, but also like students and being in relation with one another, to ask, okay, like, how are you doing today? It's that time of the year, or it's that time of whatever. And just being able to provide, like, I think that was something that I also just really, really appreciated, was that it also shifted me out of that space of incredible kind of precariousness and vulnerability into one that said, there is a community, and you can be in relation. And to see that actually happening, not just as something distant in the future, but actually playing out, kind of made the world of difference.
Thank you, Leah. For the rest of the people, we probably haven't explained this course to you, so sorry for that. But the Doctoral Academy, the librarians will know this, was in the library for this last year, and we ran a writing course within it. And we being, had to be cross-faculty, so we had Dimitri, a professor in humanities and anthropology, Rob Veal, who's been the Dean of Science, and also knows about health research, and Ivan, professor from engineering, Leah, Dr. Leah from humanities, and Dr. David Francis, or possibly professor, I don't know, from Centre for Inequality Studies. So we had faculty experts. Then we had wonderful writing fellows like Refilwe, who's now probably staff and has her doctorate already, and and Lorata was a writing fellow, Kongolo, who are the other writing, and Josh, and Fouad, and some other writing fellows in the room. So it's a big team, it was about 17, and we did work together, and we moved from a large research group to faculty-specific to writing fellows. We don't have much time left before lunch, so everyone here, could you just say one thing that you remember from the experience that surprised you, that you do differently in the future, or anything at all that you'd like to say? Rob?
I'd like to chip in because my exposure was completely different, and I actually wish that I had Leia's introduction before I started. I was a little bit of a fill-in. My interest was purely what it always has been through my academic career, was the development of postgraduates, and that was why I agreed to come along. But I'll be blatantly honest, I had no clue what I was about to experience on the first day that I arrived. Without going on forever, because I'm sure there are other opinions that we need to hear and whatnot, to sum it up, I would say I was very pleasantly surprised. The interaction that Leia has already put out had been developed, and I had to fit in somewhere along the line. The comment that you made that gave me goose pimples and still is, I would like to reiterate. The development of the writing in the groups that I dealt with, and that was science and health science, and whatever, morphed over the year. And why did it do that? It did that through the interaction that we have in amongst ourselves. I'm not quite sure what we were called. There was the faculty leaders, I see, was a term at one time, and the writing fellows. That interaction organically grew into what Leia has just expressed it became. And my experience through that as a rather narrow molecular scientist through my academic career was really gratifying. So I'll leave it like that and let others have a chance.
Oh, so pretty much I come from engineering. Again, one of the non-traditional sort of disciplines to be in, even in a gathering like this. Are there any other engineers here? I'll come back to that in like 30 seconds. So from dealing with all the other faculties and everyone else part of that doctoral academy through their writing, you are, by the way, forced to listen to everyone. Mm-hmm. And you're in an environment where it's not acceptable to walk out. So you're forced to listen to everyone. And as you're listening to everyone, the one thing that does strike you is the passion with which people are talking, and this makes you take them seriously. And when you start taking them seriously, you start to actually maybe understand them. And we had a lecture from Professor Badat on theory, and he said, this objectivity in the struggle in the Ruth First book, where how do you do objective struggle kind of research, was very important. We had to go and read it, and of course I said, well, let me go and read it, and I read it, and as I'm reading this struggle history from Ruth First, I'm thinking, who wrote this? And I go and look, and author I don't know, but what struck me was that this person was speaking engineering, and how Ruth First, as a struggle person, was engaging with things was through engineering. And if you take away the surface level writing, it's just normal engineering principles that were being applied. And then I'm thinking to myself, oh, that's why she was successful. And that view of this is engineering, then I started applying it to everyone. And people, you're engineers, okay? You're engineers. You're either trying to explain what happened so that you can fix it, and that's engineering, just with a different language. So if I ask who's an engineer in this room, you're all engineers. Okay, you're all engineers, and that now enables us to have a better discussion, because I can bring everything that I know from engineering to you and just put it in a different form, and you're going to understand it, and I can understand what you are saying, which normally I would not understand, and I can see the language, and I can say this is just engineering, and I can actually make use of that. So that was truly amazing, that what came out of there. And special thanks to my colleague who when I was trying to present what I had discovered, pointed out a flaw and made me think more deeply and made me develop my theory much more robustly.
Shall we try and do that thing here?
Oh, we could do that. Let's first chat, and if there's time, we'll do that. That's a research methods course that will have to put in 5 minutes, but it's possible.
No, just, just if you just do your original thing, and that will probably, show my method. Anyway.
They're talking about different ways of thinking about research if you're a humanities person or an engineering person, and they did it visually, because we had these very lovely discussions about different ways of thinking in different places. David?
Thanks. Yeah, I also found it to be a remarkable experience. I think the thing that I took away was how the process of writing collectively and sharing created a space where people could share work and be really critical. There was a sense in the beginning when people would present, they would like come up totally tense and be like, if you get bad feedback, how am I going to cope with this? But you don't get better if you don't. But how do you create a space where people can share actually what they think and people can tell them actually what they think? But and it turns out you can't just pull that out of the air. The fact there's kind of joint writing exercises, the sharing. And by the end we were having like really frank feedback, but it was polite, like gentle, but hopefully moving everyone. The level of self-critique by the end was amazing and streets ahead from where it was. I think at the beginning there was a lot of anxiety at the beginning. And so it's kind of the method separate from the improving in the writing, using that as not writing as thinking so much, but writing as critiquing, and I think that for me was a standout.
Yeah, just to add to that, the reluctance to share with, initially it was like, how are we going to deal with this for people like us? And so probably it's a discipline specific thing, we're grappling with that. But there was a shift. Eventually people shared with, some, so yeah, I found it interesting that initially there was a struggle with that. But I suppose we're able to create a kind of ambience where people feel that they can do that. And it's something to reflect on. How do you do that? How do you get people to be more confident about their work? Yeah.
And it's something to do with having the conversations across discipline, but also a tribute to the team. Every single member of the team is a really good teacher. And so they were coming from very, very different fields, but where we have commonality is that we're all keen on engaging students, and then talking about different ways of engaging became terribly interesting. A few more words from the Refiere. Any writing fellows present who'd like to say anything? Yes, Josh.
Thank you for calling me an engineer, Ivan. That's going on the CV. But besides that, I was primarily working with engineering faculty, PhD candidates, who did feel at the beginning a bit shy, I suppose. They didn't really understand, especially during that discussion, how to be sort of personally invested in your research. And a lot of them felt that they weren't personally invested in the research from the conversations that we were having. But gradually, you did see that sort of breaking out and finding a kind of sense of community, at least, even in the small scale of our writing group, being able to talk to each other about how the research was going as well, and how they had encountered certain problems and overcome certain problems. And to me, that was the biggest sort of victory of our writing group, was that connection that they were able to make, so that they can sort of support each other and support other academics, I assume, going further, because that really does, I think, make a lot of the problems that one encounters when writing in sort of any field, it makes a lot of them much more surmountable.
Just a comment from the transdisciplinary group I was facilitating, following up what Josh said. I think a sense of community was enabled by the framing,
Yes.
also of the narrative that you presented in this research journey tape, where there's a kind of a mutual support and there's a kind of a concern for each other, a space of holding. Because the students I was with came from as far as international relations, geosciences, actually engineering, and so really across the field, but they came also a little bit late, and so there was a sense of community, and then even in the breaks between the blocks, they would be actually quite keen to meet and to hear of each other's progress, hear then about how the submission of the proposal worked, and to work on, to listen to the feedback and to give suggestions. So, and actually until today they are still meeting. So I think it's really an interesting thing when there's a sense of community, that you start something together, and even if you're at different fields, students can be really, they can develop a community.
In addition to that, I just want to say that, when the WDA started, I had just submitted my PhD for examination in Jan, and it had been a very lonely journey. So when I became part of the WDA, at first I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I was just like, okay, it's probably going to be structured, boom, 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 do this, leave. But instead, we built this community, and I feel like the students and myself, we connected in a way that even after the sessions or the meetings here that were on specific dates, we can still check in on each other. We can still, even when we're having our writing sessions, after or before, you can still check on the field and say, hey, you said you were writing this paper, how far are you, right? And I'm a scientist, but I was working with the economics students, and that also linking to what you're saying about the feelings, right? When the discussion is there about feelings. As a scientist, we don't really talk about feelings, but it kind of, helped me to, even though I submitted, to still connect with my work after and connect with the other students' work. Again, as Prof says, in a situation where, or in a session where you can't just get up and leave. We're listening and we understand each other, and you connect. Most of the topics that they're working on, I would have to ask, what do you mean by this? Okay, how does that link to that? And it wasn't boom, boom, boom science. It wasn't just this leads to this, we move. And it was very different to my PhD, my topic, and that made the community even stronger, right, in our sessions, because as they're speaking, I'm asking questions, and I'll be like, okay, so with my PhD, I did this, and they would link it back to maybe to something like, okay, so I understand what you're saying this, but we're doing it in this way, right? And so those discussions helped a lot, right? And sometimes when I don't understand, I'd also ask David, are we doing it the right way? Because in economics, you guys do this, and in science, we do it that way. But there actually is a link. There actually is a link. We're not that separate, right? We are not that different, but the different faculties have made it seem like we are, but this transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary work that we have done has, for me, intensified the link within the communities and actually built a bigger understanding for everybody in the research, in the postdoctoral, in the doctoral journey, right? And I'm hoping that that will also continue after everybody completes their PhD, and we can still have our writing sessions there.
But yes, you can, yes.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't part of the WDA. I'm from Game of Life. I'm doing my MA there, and our pedagogy is embedded in embodied practice and embodied epistemologies. And so just listening to how each of you speak about this idea of like having been forced to listen to one another, right? And having then realizing that that made you take each other seriously, and then being able to understand each other and have that like space for empathy. is beautiful because it also just speaks to the idea of, like, we speak about practice a lot, thought and action, putting those together. And in one of our courses, Critical Reflection, it speaks to a lot to listening as a form of Ubuntu. And also we talk about listening with our skin. And I feel like sometimes when you're in those situations, you might feel forced at first. It's like a coercion because it's such a different space to be in. But once you're there, you're actually listening not just with your ears, but you start actually listening with your whole body. So there was just that beautiful connection, which I felt is actually why this was so powerful. Yeah.
Just a notice, fellow. Yeah, I think I was able to make friends with someone who's doing engineering. Whenever I share ideas, you know, he'd be like, why massaging? It's so emotional, you know. So I've learned also when I go to the Richard Watt building, when I see how they present their research, it's so clean and on point. So also, you know, there's a tendency of us from humanities to overindulge. So I'm learning the economy of words, you know, from and the presentation style, that sometimes it has to be, yeah.
Yes, last word is you.
I mean, you know, one thing that for me did happen is that one or two of the candidates from engineering, I had a conversation with them, and we could actually trace what it was in their childhood or in their family that, you know, that made them interested in, this is just, you know, I'm fabulating this, in building a bridge. Why is building bridges important for you? You know, can you just think through this? Is it because you grew up in Khayelitsha in Cape Town and you constantly had to cross the highway, which was dangerous, and then this tiny little footbridge eventually emerges, and then that footbridge changes into a, well, I suppose a moment of resistance against inequality, when people start throwing bricks on the cars of the rich. Right? So thinking about the bridge in all of those ways really just shifted there. You know.
And that's stored knowledge. It's in your body. It's the personal.
I'm going to let Kongolo have the last word on this book, because he's a poet who can work with the metaphor of the bridge, and he's an engineer.
Hey!
Go for it.
Too much pressure. But I'd say more on the cross-pollination of ideas,
Yes.
and interpolation, perhaps, in terms of the personal. So when you look at your own writing mechanics, perhaps, or the engineering of the economy of words, through listening to conversations across disciplines, perhaps even within the same faculty, engineers who deal with different things. Some are dealing with gases, some are dealing with bridges, to be able to connect that to your own process of writing, really moving away from obsessing with product, and really getting invested and interested in what is it that I do myself that helps me create and propagate my ideas across audiences. And if I'm going to be speaking today about what I'm interested in, what is the language that I'm going to use? And perhaps that's how these things connect with the theme of anonymity, is creating that space that has low stakes, but you're conversing about something that you're deeply emotional, bodily, or without those emotions that you're invested in, with a deep sort of rooted passion in the discipline and the things that you're doing. That's my sense.
Very good. P.S.
And there's an interdisciplinary reading group going on currently. The next lab, if you're interested in it, speak to Tsepo.
Perfect. Okay, excellent. Very good.
And he's a physicist.
Physicist. Excellent. And so we have lunch now, and then the first session after lunch, beautifully, is about writing groups with Fouad and Armand.